Good afternoon, ladies. This screencast is going to start with the independence of Texas from Chapter 8 notes. So, the territory of Mexico is going to win its independence from Spain in the early 1800s. If you kind of recall, the territory that is to the west of the Louisiana Purchase, kind of the southwest, was possessed by Spain. Up until this point, what I'm saying is Mexico has kind of won its own independence from Spain. So now that territory is not going to be considered like Spanish possession, but rather Mexican possession. If you look at the map on the screen, you see it labeled in yellow as Spanish possession, but now you're going to think of all that territory as Mexico at this point in history. Okay? Think about how we broke away from Great Britain as we were a colony of Great Britain, and then we broke away and became our own country. That's what Mexico has done, but they broke away from Spain. So when this territory is established as under Mexican control, the Mexican government actually started to encourage American settlers to settle in the Texas territory, which is just west of the Louisiana line. Texas was pretty unpopulated, and they know Americans are more populated. They want Americans to come and settle the lands, kind of cultivate the land, develop the land. Of course, they would be expected to follow Mexican law over American law because they would be in Mexican territory within Texas. But what's going to start to happen is the number of Americans living in Texas are going to start outnumbering the number of Mexicans living in Texas. So they feel their alliance is more towards America than to Mexico. And eventually what's going to happen is the Americans living in Texas are going to start to rebel against the Mexican government and try to become independent from Mexico. So just Texas itself within Mexico is going to try to rebel against the Mexican government. Now, this isn't America's government rebelling. This is American people living in Texas rebelling against Mexico. In this rebellion, this war for Texas independence, we're going to have a very famous battle, the Battle at the Alamo. You're probably familiar with that saying, remember the Alamo. This is actually in present-day San Antonio, Texas. You can actually see it today as a sightseeing spot. But this is a very days-long battle, a very significant battle fought between the Mexican government and the Texas rebels, the Americans and the Texas rebels. And the American side actually loses this battle. So the saying, remember the Alamo, is actually more of a battle cry for the rest of the revolution. Within about a month or longer of fighting, the territory of Texas will win its full independence from Mexico. Now, so at this point, Texas is its own independent place, okay? It won its independence from Mexico. So Mexico had won its independence from Spain, and now Texas has won its independence from Mexico. The people, though, living in Texas are majority American. They pretty much immediately request to be annexed by the United States, which would mean the U.S. would absorb Texas as American territory for itself if we chose to annex it. But the presidents you see on the screen, which you don't need to write down their names, but it's several years that American presidents do not choose to annex Texas, maybe because of several reasons, they have other issues going on, they're distracted, maybe they're afraid that Mexico's only going to leave Texas alone until another country would try to claim it for themselves. Then we could potentially have problems with Mexico. And then also perhaps concern over the slavery issue, because Texas is a pretty big territory. Are they going to want to be a free state or a slave state? That could cause problems down the line. So it's just kind of put off for several years. Another territory I wanted to mention that's going to kind of come to exist at this point is the Oregon Territory. Now, we've been if you know the Oregon Territory, it's in the northwest part of the United States. We had kind of become to settle this territory earlier on. We have been kind of cohabitating in the Oregon Territory between us and Great Britain, because, they possess Canada, so they're north of us, and then we would be south of them. So we're kind of cohabitating here. It's not officially annexed as part of U.S. territory, but there are many Americans living in Oregon. The number of Americans living in Oregon starts to increase. There's some rumors circulating and some stories about wealthy soil and successful port cities, and so there's kind of a pull of people to come into Oregon, and so we're going to see Americans come to settle in Oregon. The more come, there's a well-known trail that's traveled to get to Oregon called the Oregon Trail. So it's like the general path that the Americans took to settle in the Oregon Territory. Some Americans would break off of the Oregon Trail and settle a little south of Oregon in a territory known as California. Recall that California is currently possessed by Mexico because it's part of Mexican territory now. Americans maybe are starting to greatly settle in California, hoping that one day they can pull a Texas and eventually enough Americans would live in California to rise up and rebel against the Mexican government, and it could be its own independent place too. But for now, we just kind of have a balance. In the presidential election of 1844, this is going to be the last election that we see Henry Clay run in. Okay. And what's going to happen is that Clay is going to run as a Whig candidate, while as the Democrats are going to run James K. Polk. Polk's slogan during his campaign is going to become 54-40 or fight. And what he is saying is the 54-40 comes from the line of latitude that we want to claim as the boundary between American and British territory within Oregon. We don't have an officially established line within the Oregon Territory that separates American and British soil, so we want it to be at the 54th line of latitude, which would be perhaps a little higher than what England wants it to be. They would want it lower, obviously, because that gets them more territory. So by James K. Polk claiming 54-40 or fight, he is saying we are going to demand that the territory of Oregon ends, for America-wise, at the 54th parallel, or we will be fighting over it. Polk also claims during his campaign that he will plan to annex Texas as soon as he became president. And Henry Clay was kind of still campaigning on his tariff reform plan, the very old school, kind of outdated economic reform. So that's just not gaining him a whole lot of popularity at this point. Polk is appealing to both the Southerners who want to see Texas annexed because they're hoping it would be a slave state, and the Northerners who want to see Oregon annexed because it gains us territory and it's likely to be a free state eventually. So Polk will easily win the election, and the first thing that happens under Polk's presidency is that he annexes the Texas territory. And in class tomorrow, we're going to start talking about what sort of negative repercussions he has with that. Okay, so write down any questions you have. We'll go over it more in class tomorrow, and I hope you all have a good day.